My thanks to the leadership of the Rainbow Push Coalition for inviting me to join this wonderful event. Special thanks to your president and founder, my dear friend, the Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. Thank you, Reverend Jackson, for your unrelenting commitment to social and economic justice, to amplify the voices of Americans who are too often ignored, for just being you, a force for good. I am proud to partner with you and the entire Rainbow Push Coalition to help improve the lives of people in need. As Secretary, I will ensure HUD fulfills our mission to expand housing opportunities for the American people, to help more people of color, including young people burdened with student debt, to afford their first homes, to revitalize underserved communities, to break down unjust barriers that prevent Black and brown folks from moving into neighborhoods with better schools, better jobs, cleaner air, and greener streets. We know people of color continue to face discrimination in our housing market when trying to rent homes, to secure mortgages, and to have our homes appraised. Houses in largely Black neighborhoods are too often assessed at far lower values than similar homes in white neighborhoods. At times, the appraisal gap between homes owned by white families and homes owned by Black families can surpass $100,000. This is a situation we cannot accept. This past June, I had the honor of joining President Biden in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to mark the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre and to declare this administration's commitment to advance equity and racial justice. On that day, the President announced a new initiative that brings together partners from across our federal government to help root out systemic racism from our appraisal market. It is the first such effort in the history of our nation, and I am proud to say that I will serve as its leader. President Biden understands America must make dramatic investments to rebuild existing affordable housing and help more people find an affordable place to live. Roughly half of our public housing stock is more than 50 years old. Many properties face major capital needs. This is not just a safety issue, but an issue of racial justice, since Americans of color represent more than 70% of people in public housing. That is why President Biden has proposed a new budget for HUD that invests more than $3 billion toward public housing capital funds. This support can help repair and restore our public housing and greatly improve the quality of life for the residents we serve. In addition to the vital funding contained in HUD's budget, the President has called for historic new housing investments through his Build Back Better agenda. His plan would help construct or preserve more than 2 million affordable homes. The Build Back Better agenda would lower the cost of the basic things every American depends on. It would lower taxes for the middle-class families, for families of modest means, lower the cost of child care, lower the cost of prescription drugs and health care, lower the cost of housing. The Build Back Better agenda sets forth a bold blueprint to forge a stronger and more prosperous America for generations to come. When I consider the mission before us, I'm reminded of the story of Nehemiah, who was moved by God to restore the walls of Jerusalem after they were destroyed by Babylon. Throughout that process, the enemies of Israel schemed constantly to thwart his progress. As Nehemiah built the walls higher and higher, they called on him to cease his work, to come down and address their grievances. Yet Nehemiah would not bow to their demands. Instead, he told them, "I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and come down to you?" Today, I tell you that HUD is engaged in a great work. Our great work is to give every American a fair chance to secure a safe, affordable, and dignified place to call home, to live in a thriving community where opportunity is abundant. Like Nehemiah, we will work without fail to accomplish the task at hand. We will not be distracted. We will not be dissuaded. We will not be denied by the enemies of progress. I know everyone joining this convention shares in that commitment. Together, we can help make housing for all a reality in our nation. HUD is proud to serve as your ally and your partner in realizing this vital cause, and I look forward to the great work we will accomplish. Thank you very much.
The basketball rims don't have nets on them, they took them off.
At the beginning of Women's History Month, Reverend Jackson was alerted by Rainbow Push Coalition National Field Director Bishop Tavis Grant and National Youth Director Reverend Cameron Barnes of complaints of mold, mice, lack of repairs, and proper management at Concordia Place Apartments affecting the lives of women and children.
We shouldn't live like this. A dog live better than this.
We found certain patterns that we found to be quite disturbing.
Reverend Jackson and staff acted immediately and arranged meetings with Capital Realty Group officials and HUD officials to discuss the problems and find some possible resolutions.
You need to be treated with dignity and respect, and we need to resolve these issues. HUD, I'm here today because we're committed to it.
And part of the challenge is you shouldn't make more and have to pay more. You should have to make more and have to pay more. And then what you're paying for, you're not getting appropriate services as deemed necessary to achieve quality of life.
Dozens of tenants complained of lack of leadership, mismanagement, decay, lack of repairs, rodents, mold, rent gouging, and the like. Some tenants have had these complaints for over 2 decades.
It's just been rats, roaches, mold.
We get sick every week. We get sinus infection, asthma attacks, everything.
Reaching management is like impossible.
We've been fighting this for too long.
Reverend Jackson and staff are currently working with Capital Realty Group, the City of Chicago, and HUD officials for immediate resolution for the following: securing the process of getting reimbursement from their cars being towed, reopening the laundry facilities on the weekend, rent assessment, making certain no one is overcharged for their rent, 14-day inspection by HUD officials for repairs, recreational facilities for children, technology lab for tenants, management tenant meetings.
We're going to fight this fight. The cameras are here. We're here.
What we supposed to do? It's not right. It's not right. It's not fair. It's like you said, you don't go home to rest. Your kids are crying. Your kids is not sleeping in the bed with you. And they scared. It's not right. But I want you to tell me what you gonna do with this. Hello. No, what you gonna do with it? 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 I gotta take this out, everything. So what you gonna do?
You know what it is, and I'm very sorry.
Leave it right there. Give it
I know what it is, and I'm very sorry.
Put it on the floor.
Tell them about the maintenance men
Walking
coming.
in my house while I'm naked, and I have them on camera saying that the management said that they can. I had no notice, no letter, because I'm always prepared when they're ready to come in. I'm always at home, and somebody always in my house, and I have 4 girls and 1 boy.
Here's the problem. I think HUD needs to convene the next meeting, because if they don't mean HUD sign, it may mean nothing. That's how HUD is in the equation, right? So just blowing off does not help us at all.
So what the Reverend is referring now, we will do what it takes, whatever HUD wants us to do. The plan was to do the inspections, not do any remediation. Before we do remediation, have HUD decide, and as the Push Coalition decide the right way of the remediation. The plan is just to do the inspections, besides for the today's exterminating and the mold, which is obviously 2 crucial things.
As many of you all know, this pandemic has exacerbated all levels of unemployment, uninsured, those who don't have access to capital and have access to medicine and appropriate health care. So our work here at Concordia is very significant to raising quality of life and restoring the dignity of people.
Tenants were given the great news during the Saturday meeting that thus far, the laundromat is now open on weekends. There is no longer only one way in and one way out of the apartment complex. Previously, a child died due to non-access to the complex. If cars were towed during the snowstorm, everyone will have their $220 refunded. Because of the list of demands, there will be a mandatory inspection of the 297 units at Concordia Place. Each tenant will be given 48 hours notice before the inspection begins. Rent calculations will be reevaluated. Playground will be open. Basketball nets will be restored so the courts can reopen. Grills can be used. The Rainbow Push Coalition and the tenants will work together to ensure that real change is gonna come. Reverend Jackson is now calling on a rent strike being organized until repairs are made to remove mold, rodent infestations, and replacement of new appliances.
I appreciate you all for coming out to support us in this fight that we've been having at Concordia Place Apartments to get livable conditions. And we thank you for your continuous fight and continuous help. We really appreciate it because we have hope now. Because at first we didn't have any hope, but now we do have hope, and we thank you so very much.
This is our next step to finally getting something done.
I like the new improvements that they finna start having. I hope they take the no parking signs down so we can park.
Hopefully everything is going to be updated soon and we can see change.
I'm glad that we've come together as a community to get things in order, and I'm here for the change.
Concordia? Give me an example for the nation.
This is an ongoing action item for the Rainbow Push Coalition. Stay tuned.
It is a great day to be alive, and this is the Rainbow Push International Convention. And as you know, the work of Jesse Jackson has spanned the breadth and length of this country for 55 years. And we're coming to you via our virtual in-person convention this year. We're endeavoring to beat the bug and maintain the victory over the virus. And so we thank you. You want to get more information about what we're doing, go to rainbowpush.org or go to any of our social platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. As you know, for the past several months during this year, we've been involved in a number of housing projects, housing initiatives, as it was Dr. King's maiden voyage to Chicago around the issue of fair housing. And since then, through the creation of Operation Breadbasket, Operation Push, and now Rainbow Push, Reverend Jackson has continued that work here in Chicago and around the country. And we have, as part of our panelists today for our housing initiative, a person I've grown to appreciate and have a great deal of respect for. His name is Jim Cunningham, and he is the Midwest Deputy Regional Administrator for HUD here in the Midwest. Welcome, Jim Cunningham.
Thank you, Bishop. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the Biden administration and our Secretary, Marcia Fudge. My job, as you said, is the Deputy Regional Administrator for the Regional Office of HUD. We cover 6 states, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. And I am responsible for the delivery of HUD programs throughout the 6-state region. I oversee 6 other field offices, including the Chicago regional office. So I have staff in each of those offices, and we make sure that we provide housing assistance and deliver HUD programs for the great people of the Midwest.
Well, I want to start there because a lot of people do not know exactly what HUD does and what the functionality of HUD. As a former public housing resident myself, as a child, and then as I've matriculated through our work at the Rainbow Push Coalition, there are so many different perspectives and perceptions about HUD. And I guess a lot of people don't know what HUD does until they need HUD. Similar to the work we do with Reverend Jackson. They don't know us until they need us. Tell us a bit of what the functionality of HUD is, and what are some of the programs that you oversee that people just don't know unless they need them.
Great, yeah. So we do a lot at HUD. The simplest thing I think that we do, that I always say, that we're a funder and a regulator, right? So we provide a lot of funding for both housing and community development programs. You mentioned public housing, so we are responsible for providing primarily capital funds and operating funds to public housing agencies. In Illinois, for example, there's 117 housing authorities throughout the state that we provide that money to so that they provide housing, either through traditional public housing, which what we've known it doesn't necessarily exist anymore, you know, the Cabrini homes, Robert Taylor homes, you think of those, but they also do housing choice vouchers, which allows folks to rent on the private market. Our other big program is actually on the private side, where we've been engaged at Concordia Place. They're privately owned, and we provide a Section 8, we call it a housing assistance payment contract. So we have a business agreement with these private owners to make sure that they provide decent, safe, and sanitary housing, and that in all of our rental programs, residents pay 30% of their income for rent. So those are the big kind of housing provider programs. We also work with state and local governments. We provide grants through the Community Development Block Grant Program. It allows from a wide range of services to communities, whether it's public services or public infrastructure. We also run the Home Affordable Housing Program. We work with homeless providers to provide housing assistance for those experiencing homelessness, whether it's through emergency shelters, but primarily we try to get them into permanent supportive housing through the Housing First model. The other program you mentioned, Reverend King's fight for fair housing, we enforce the Fair Housing Act. That's one of our primary functions. So we take complaints and we either investigate them ourselves or we work with state and local agencies that have the same powers to enforce the Fair Housing Act. So as you can see, we do quite a bit. We also, another important is our FHA, Federal Housing Administration. So we basically insure lenders against default, which is a vital step to increasing home ownership. We're clearly trying to, under this administration, trying to close the gap between Black and brown homeownership and white homeownership. That gap is, unfortunately, it's actually higher than it was 50 years ago when Dr. King started the fight for fair housing. So we have a lot of work to do, but we're going to come up with policies to try to break down those barriers, use the FHA to allow for more minority home ownership. So we, like I said, we do quite a bit. Most of it is through funding. And again, like I said, we do oversight. We got to make sure, one of the things that's vitally important is that we not only have people pay their rent, but they have a decent, safe, and sanitary place to live. So we make sure that all the housing that we support provides decent, safe, and sanitary housing. So we make sure that owners or housing authorities are living up to that commitment because of our funding.
Well, you know, one of the things that's interesting is Secretary Fudge seems to have her finger on the pulse of trying to empower persons to become first-time homeowners. And it appears that she's been able to secure dollars through some of the various bills to fund that. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that where people miss it is the generational dynamic, the cycle dynamic of public housing, where you have 2 or 3 generations that cycle through public housing and seemingly never get out of it. And it seems as though through the Biden administration, there is an attempt to reset and give individuals a real chance at first-time home ownership in a way that has not existed before. And the benefit of that is it affords communities to grow in an exponential way. Home ownership speaks for itself. It creates a tax base. It creates opportunities for investment and recapitalization, but it also affords kind of a beyond the emotional aspect of it, a real sense of wealth building, which is critical to Black and brown communities. Talk a little bit about her initiative and some things that that bring direct benefit to individuals and communities as a whole.
Right, and I think, thanks for that question. And I think one of the biggest things is, regardless of funding, it's breaking down the policy barriers. We've seen her double down on our fair housing enforcement. You may have seen recently, we've seen that the difference in appraisals. So we're enforcing the Fair Housing Act that, that when people are appraising homes, we're seeing that some appraisers are lowering the values for Black homeowners. So it's ultimately important that we make sure we do that job first, is enforce the Fair Housing Act and make sure that everyone's on a level playing field, because we know from history that's not the case. Second, couple other policy barriers. We've just treated the way we look at student loan debt differently when we're doing FHA loans. That's vitally important because when we're looking at credit, one of the biggest barriers is a credit score and having bad credit. So we're looking at those policies to make sure that those are eliminated. If you look at the Biden administration's proposals under the American Jobs Plan, there are tools to both reinvest in communities, particularly distressed communities, through homeowner rehabilitation programs, grants to state and local governments to help fix those homes up and make them available to first-time home buyers. One of the other things that we're talking about is extending, a typical mortgage is 30 years, but if we extend that to 40, that lowers the amount of payments that folks have to make over time. So it makes homeownership more affordable. The other policy is zoning. There's a proposal in the American Jobs Plan to give incentives to communities that take a look at their zoning policies. I just read an article recently where, like, in most of our major cities, 75% of the land is single family use only, which prohibits multi-unit developments, which are often less expensive. So we're looking to incentivize communities to do the right thing and allow for different types of housing that's both green and friendly, but also affordable to the average home buyer. So we're taking a long look at that. There's a lot of policy initiatives in the American Jobs Plan that offer incentives to put a lot of housing stock back on the market. So I think it's vitally important, and we're looking at ways to do down payment assistance through either the home program. One of the second biggest barrier is coming up with that down payment and how we look at it, particularly in FHA, the things that we can control. So there's, like I said, there's multiple facets of things that we're trying to do to increase access, level the playing field, making sure that everyone has the same shot at home ownership. Because as you said, it is the way that we build wealth in this country, and everyone should have access to that.
When you talk about leveling the playing field, one of the things that we experienced, and on behalf of Reverend Jackson, I want to commend you and your staff, top to bottom, when we saw the conditions at Concordia and we responded to the calls from the tenants and the tenant council. It was refreshing how you and your staff came in the midst of the height of COVID in Chicago to respond in person and otherwise to give a sense of empowerment to the tenants. And one of the things that I learned is that the average resident in public housing does not know what their rights are, how to go about using those rights to right or wrong, if you will, or to get some sense of some sense of resolve. For example, if it's recertification, or if it's a condition of a unit, or if there's a management issue. We were great. We were, incredibly impressed with the fact that staff came right on without hesitation to show tenants what to do, how to do it, even, in many instances, teaching the owner or showing the owner or instructing the owner on what they must do equally to empower. And I think there's a misnomer about HUD by the average individual, that there is a means by which you actually empower, equip, educate residents and tenants in public housing, so that there is not this sense of us versus them, or they are to some extent exiled from the rest of the community wherever these properties exist. Talk a little bit about that, because I don't think many of the residents didn't know. Many of the people we talked to didn't know, and there is a process, a balance, but I think the disconnect is it's almost like you don't know all the fire department has to offer until you have a fire, right? You don't know the ladder truck, you don't know the you just don't know. They can bring a wellspring of resources just by dialing 911, but if you never have to do it, you never need it. And I think that that's at the ground level, it gets lost, that residents feel like the only way that they can engage in change is in a leasing office or in between them and the owner and management. And yet HUD has a number of tools that do level the playing field. Talk a little bit about that process.
Sure. First, thank you for that. And I think that the first thing I want to say is that I think every American deserves a right to live in a decent, safe, and sanitary home and live there without fear, right? And I think I've said this before, that I think a lot of tenants live in fear that because they receive subsidized housing or someone else is paying a portion of the rent, that they don't have a voice. That's just simply not the case. We make sure that we actually have documents called residents' rights and responsibilities. They do also have a responsibility too, right? They have to live up to their end of the bargain, but they do have a voice. And if something's not going right, they need to know what options they have. And it depends on the type of housing, but there are vehicles for them to make sure that work orders get completed, that their certification, they're paying the right amount of rent. In our multifamily business, these are the privately owned. Mostly we have a contract administrator in all 50 states that that administer that contract, or HUD. And they are the first, well, first of all, the first stop should always be your leasing agent, right? Whenever you have a problem, you should be able to go there and it should get resolved. It should. I'm not naive enough to think that it always gets resolved. So whether it's a public housing authority, an on-site manager, but that's the first place that people should go. But like I said, on multifamily side, the privately owned, we have contract administrators. They help us. And if people don't talk and if something's going wrong, we don't know about it at HUD. And so that's kind of like the first place to go, because that helps us. We call it building an administrative record. So if we have an owner that's not doing what they're supposed to do, then we know. And you can always, if that doesn't resolve things, you can always call HUD. We're in every phone book, and our website is a wealth of information. We are there to make sure, even during COVID, we are returning everyone's phone call that calls it. It may not be as quick, but within 24 hours, we're calling people back. So residents should not ever live in fear. If they complain to HUD, they will not be retaliated against. And if they are, we need to know about it. But their voice is very important. And, no one knows better the condition of a property than someone that's living there. We don't, we have a lot, I mentioned all the programs at the beginning. We have a very large portfolio of HUD assisted households all across the country. And we can't realistically, even though we do annual inspections, we can't be there and things change, even if we do it, when we do our inspections in a timely manner, that's just a point in time. So the residents really need to have a voice. They have a voice, and there's several mechanisms for them to call if they're in a housing authority. These are public bodies. They have a board of commissioners. They have annual, monthly meetings of the board. So there's ways to have your voices heard. And I think everyone, I've said this at the first meeting we had at Concordia, everyone deserves the right to live with dignity and respect. And that's being respected when you have a problem and trying to get that problem addressed.
Around the country, it almost appears that these properties to some extent are like islands to themselves. Many times they're gated, or they're fenced in. And it's almost like no man's land, right? unless they are these pristine buildings with new, infrastructure and whatnot. What type of initiatives or functionalities or engagement that HUD has to really kind of participate in a better weaving, if you will, or blending, if you will, of these properties into the fabric of local communities, because oftentimes it is almost like a us versus them. They live over there, we live over here, we live in here, they live out there, and there's not always the interlinking of the properties within the mainstream, if you will, of a given community. And we've met residents across the country that kind of feel like they are almost in a different country, different state, given the culture of the city, of the community. How do we go about, ensuring that these are not one-offs, or these are not abstracts from the main life? And I know HUD in times past tried to attempt this with properties that were mixed income properties, like the property that once used on the site where Cabrini Green is. You just launched a multi, living situation, 100 or so units, and it's a fantastic building, by the way. But long term, how do we make sure that even the children on these properties, they go to school with children in residential areas, and and culturally, it's almost like it's them versus us, or us versus them. How do we do a better job? Because I think that's critical to the overall development of the community, that these properties have tremendous possibilities, but there's not always, again, a healthy balance where it's not us and then versus them, it's all of us.
Right. So I think there, a couple things come to mind. On the public housing side, particularly, we have the rental assistance demonstration program that allows housing authorities to basically get out of the public housing the way that we traditionally fund it, and actually raise debt, because under the current, if you're in public housing, you can't hold debt on the property. It's just the nature of the program. So the RAD program allows them to switch to the Section 8 platform, whether it's project-based or project-based vouchers or project-based rental assistance, but allows them to raise debt. So they are able to recapitalize these projects, and a lot of them do substantial rehabilitation, which allows them to change the footprint. I think you've seen that with a lot of, in the Chicago Housing Authority has done that with many of their properties. And many housing authorities have done that and changed the platform and allow them to reinvest and change some of those dynamics. The biggest program HUD has is the Choice Neighborhood Grant Program, which is meant to do exactly everything that you're talking about. It's available to distressed public housing and multifamily properties as well. So it covers all of our platforms, and it's got three components. One is it's housing, obviously, because that's our focus, but it's also got community and it's got people. So we invest in community services for the people, but it also has a community development component. A good example that you might be familiar with is in Woodlawn in the Chicago neighborhood. We transformed, I think, a 600-unit building right on Cottage Grove into several mixed income developments. The result of that has been a grocery store in a traditional food desert. We did not fund that. That was done, it was an economic decision by the grocery store owner. But because of our investment, there was a demand and they saw it and they made the economic choice to go there. So those are the kinds of things that we actually transformed that whole neighborhood dynamic through our HUD investment. And again, I mentioned this before, but part of the American Jobs Plan is we typically give out only 5 or 6 of these grants a year all across the country. There's more money requested in the American Jobs Plan to allow more communities to undergo that. But I think you're exactly right. The other thing that I would also argue is that we do I mentioned our community development programs at the top. HUD's Section 108 is part of the Community Development Block Grant Program. It can leverage large sums of money to do this. So you need local involvement. Get in touch with your local planning, community planning and development officials, your local elected officials. They should be engaged. You should be engaging with these folks to try to get community resources and do exactly what you're saying, because we should be integrated in having every equal opportunity and equal access to amenities, school, and transportation, all those things that matter. It's not just housing. It really is a whole community, and we need to make sure that everyone has access to all of those same amenities that everyone else does.
When we met with elected officials, both locally and around the state, and some federal people, we had an amazing meeting with Maxine Waters, whose committee does a lot of financing, and she has a pulse on issues of housing and economics. Part of the challenge was bringing a lot of them up to speed as to the whole, issue and template of housing, all right, and in particular public housing. What are some of, how do we simplify this? Because you just mentioned a code or a section or something as related to a grant. And I think part of the challenge is, HUD is so massive in its functionality because it's a federal agency, that on the local level, I think the misnomer is they're too big. They're too big to contend with. They're too big to engage, and I think that was really like what gave a greater sense of confidence when staff on Zooms and in-person emails responded when Reverend Jackson reached out, and not just about Concordia, but across the country. How do we simplify this so that we can impact more lives and more families and more communities? Because those of you who are watching wherever you are, whether it is New York or Memphis or Atlanta or Dallas, Texas, Austin, Texas, or Los Angeles, it is so critical that you know and you become familiar and even educated on these fundamentals, because our work at Rainbow Push is on several levels. One, to raise the quality of life, that in Reverend Jackson's words, to create a more perfect union. Secondly, to gain access. And you've heard Mr. Cunningham talk about grants and financing, community block grants and such. Access to capital becomes critical to building wealth, and building wealth also includes home ownership. Last but not least, the fundamentals of engagement. And you've heard Mr. Cunningham talk about tenant council and the rights of residents and what have you. It is so very, very important that on this subject matter, that if you have a family member that lives in public housing in a senior building, they're receiving any type of federal subsidy or federal dollars, it becomes important that you become engaged, involved, and educated in this. And you can see at the bottom of the screen, rainbowpush.org, or you can even call us directly in Chicago at 773-373-3366. But I think, Jim, one of the things that we've tried to do is try to simplify this so that the very basic fundamental aspects of being involved in HUD, people don't get lost. I have to admit that when I first got involved, I personally kind of became overwhelmed until I had several engagements with you and your staff, and I saw it from a different perspective. I didn't see it as this humongous federal agency, but I saw it up close and personal as I became more and more engaged and understood the fundamentals. And so we as an organization try to simplify it when we refer people to HUD or refer people to national housing compliance. I mean, it's important to kind of, how do we do that collectively? So let me use a faith-based church terminology. We can sing from the same hymn book. How do we do that?
I think that's my role and my colleagues' role. And I would say that we have a field office in every single state, Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. Reach out. I'm a deputy regional administrator, and I have field office directors in those field offices. And there's 6 of them in our region, but there's a field office, at least one in every state, and obviously some more in others. But reach out to a field office director and sit down. We talk to anyone. I mean, we answer, like I mentioned, we're still answering the phones, but I think it's kind of incumbent on us to demystify HUD. We work for the people. We work for you, and we work for everyone on the Zoom call. And I think that that's very, very, very important, and that reach out, and we'd be glad to, when we get back to normal, whether it's or via Zoom or Teams or however, we are ready, willing, and able to talk about our programs and get down to the, just kind of the real basics and how you can have your voice heard, and kind of like take the mystery out of, we're not this big behemoth industry, but we are big, we do a lot of things, but, making sure that you're living in good conditions, that's our job. And so I just would say, reach out. We can talk, we try to talk in plain English. I know I can't help myself. I've been working for HUD for 30 years, but I'll throw out a section of the act, but that's how we talk. But we can also, when I talk about Section 108, I can talk about it in simple terms. It's a loan guarantee program. It's simple as that. So we're able, and we have knowledgeable staff all across this country that are dedicated public servants, and we can certainly work with any groups to try to answer their questions, particularly for our HUD assisted residents, because they are ultimately our client.
Well, this is freedom at best, being able to have an engagement like this as a part of our international convention. This is freedom to equality, leveling the playing field as part of our annual international convention, the work of Jesse Jackson. I've been sharing with Jim Cunningham, the Midwest Deputy Regional Administrator for HUD, and you can get his information from our website, rainbowpush.org, or from any of our social media platforms. I want to thank him for sharing with us today and being a part of change. Now, oftentimes, the challenges of working government and organizations like Rainbow Push can sometimes be combative and confrontational. In this instance, it's been a collaboration that's brought about a great deal of constructive change, not just here in Chicago, but around the country. And I hope that you will share this, like this, and comment in your networks about this, and do what we're asking you to do. Get involved, get engaged, and become educated about this. The whole idea that we're in a country now where we now are in a position to have greater access to capital, greater opportunities to build wealth, and ensure that the quality of life is not just for somebody, it's for everybody, is a role and a responsibility all of us can reach. And so as the National Field Director for the Rainbow Push Coalition, guess what? We're keeping hope alive. Thank you so very much. Continue to enjoy this incredible convention. Go to the schedule, log in, register, and don't forget to tell somebody to keep hope alive. This is Bishop Grant. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
For 2021, we're excited to get more people engaged and involved in Rainbow Push, supporting the programs of Push for Excellence and the Citizenship Education Fund. Now, if you're interested in public policy and you want to help change the policies that impact those who are incarcerated, you can do so. If you're interested in impacting public policies that benefit education and businesses with social economic solutions, you can do that as well. You can become a policymaker by becoming a member of Rainbow Push right now. Now, if you believe in the scholarships that we've given to thousands of students each year, you can help us out. We've awarded more than $10 million in scholarships year to date. Now, you can help young people achieve a higher education by becoming a member of Rainbow Push right now for the annual fee of only $35. And if you're a student or a senior, it's only $15. You can help us make a difference in the lives of millions. Now, if you watch us every week, or if you listen to us on the radio, or if you're viewing on social media, we need you to become a member. And how do you become a member? It's simple. Visit us at rainbowpush.org and press join. Maybe you'd like to support the work of Push. If so, it's really simple. You can do so by texting the word PUSH, that's P-U-S-H, to 41444 on your cell phone, and you can give any amount that you feel comfortable giving, or you can call us at 773-256-2775 or go to rainbowpush.org and push donate. So whenever you want to support, you can do it from anywhere. So keep pushing, because we're going to keep pushing for you and keep hope alive.
Good afternoon. My name is Rita McNeil Danish. I'm a partner at Taft, Stettinius & Hollister in our Columbus, Ohio office and in our Chicago office, as well as the CEO and principal of JD Squared Strategist, where I work with small minority women-owned businesses and governmental entities, helping them address needs to small minority women-owned businesses as well. Today we have a fantastic panel for you regarding affordable housing. And I think we will all agree that there is a housing affordability crisis in this country. Rents have increased dramatically since the Great Recession, outstripping inflation and especially burdening low-income households and people of color. Home prices are soaring, especially right now, and 75% of renters earning less than $50,000 a year spend more than 30% of their income on housing. There is no shortage of policy proposals to address the housing problem. As we all know, mayors across the country have made affordability housing one of the cornerstones of their campaigns. There are some that encourage the federal government to invest in building more public housing. Others suggest increasing subsidies to builders of affordable housing and apartments, and still others recommend drastically increasing the availability of rent vouchers. Today, we have an exceptional panel that gets to address all of those, because we have today a representative from local government, we have a representative from the development community, and then we also have a representative from a housing authority. And so we get to address all of these suggestions, all of these proposals, and all of these thoughts as we discuss what creative affordable housing will look like in 2022 and the future. But let me introduce you to our esteemed panel. First, we have Jeffrey Patterson. He is CEO of the Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority. He is CEO of one of the largest housing authorities in the country, responsible for a $230 million budget. Then we have Pam Weidman. She is the Director of Housing and Neighborhood Services for the City of Charlotte, North Carolina. In this role, she is responsible for the oversight of the city's affordable housing efforts, among many other efforts. And last but not least is Raymond Nix, who is the founder and president of NixDev LLC. NixDev specializes in the development of mixed income affordable housing and community revitalization. I hope you will welcome my panel. I think we have a great panel in front of us, and obviously they will be able to touch on many of the issues and proposals that are attendant to affordable housing. Let's start with the big question, or what I would call the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. And in your dream world and 2022 and beyond, what does creative affordable housing look like? How about I start with you, Pam?
Sure. Thank you, Rita, and thank you for the opportunity to share with this esteemed audience today. For 2022 and beyond, what does creative affordable housing look like? For me, it's a combination of things. There's no one size fits all. And so it would be mixed income housing in communities throughout. in neighborhoods throughout the city and communities where people can live together, no matter what their race, creed, or their income is, that there are housing opportunities for all wherever you are. It would also look like more intentional partnerships between governments, the local government, the federal government, and state governments, and the private sector. I think affordable housing particularly is a community solution that's going to require community partnerships and community answers. And I would also say on the other side of just outside of the infrastructure of affordable housing is that people don't have to work more than one job so that they can obtain housing no matter what income level they are at. So that would mean we have enough opportunities of different housing options throughout our nation.
How about you, Ray? What are your thoughts? Creative affordable housing 2022 and into the future.
2022 and into the future. And first off, just good afternoon, and really pleased to be here and appreciate the opportunity to participate in the panel. I would, echo what Pam said as far as I think moving forward, you're going to see a greater emphasis on developing communities that have that promote and emphasize a mixed income community. I think we're already starting to see some of the tools and the financing space that allow for creative stacks to not penalize developers for bringing in more of a mixed income approach, so that you're not deconcentrating the entire population of households, below 60 or below 50%, and that there is some recognition that there is something socially significant about mixing the incomes from 30%, maybe even all the way up to 120%, as defined by HUD with workforce housing, but to also put financing options and incentives around actually mixing the income population. I think that there'll also be a great emphasis on and special attention paid to transit-oriented development and developing projects that are located in areas that don't require you necessarily to have a vehicle or two vehicles per household, so that folks can still access the economic development hubs and engines in our urban communities and still live close to housing. We maybe even incentivize developments or builders of mixed use spaces to provide affordable housing within the actual developments, to provide for a greater amount of density if that additional density comes along with a bonus attributed to affordable housing. And I think the other thing is that selfishly as a developer is coming up with a way to increase or establish affordable housing trusts in all the cities throughout the United States, whether it be through tapping into impact fees on traditional market rate development, or setting aside a portion of the general bonds or general fund budgets within municipalities to provide for resources other than just the traditional resources that seem to get used very quickly on a small amount of projects within certain cities. So I would say that those three things would be things that I would hope that we continue to evolve and be more creative moving forward.
Thank you. And we're going to touch some of those a little later. But last but not least, Mr. Patterson.
Thank you. And again, I'd like to thank you and everyone for the opportunity of joining this very knowledgeable panel. We have some folks that I think have some really good ideas. I don't want to go back and go over points that they've made, because I agree with everything that both Pamela and Ray have said. I think I'll go back to something that you mentioned earlier about the need to increase the amount of funding and the amount of access to more public housing, affordable housing created, as well as the opportunity to increase the Housing Choice Voucher Program by making more access to affordable housing opportunities. And I also think that it's important to look at home ownership as well, and making home ownership a valuable opportunity for people to be able to have access to, and that home ownership needs to be affordable. I think it's important to provide that access to people for that, and to look at providing the training, the wraparound services and supportive services to help people prepare to be able to take the next steps that they want to take in their life. But it's essential that we continue to build and work on creating more affordable housing opportunities throughout the nation. It's not just a regional or a city issue, it's a national issue. And it's something that I think collaborating between governments, developers, entities such as ours, I think is the way to go to be able to make this a successful outcome for all involved.
Thank you. Thank you. It's amazing that I think we all agree that it's not one fix, but it's a multiple of factors. And so I kind of tried to break down some of the factors so that we could drill down further into what's a good idea, what's a best practice, what's going to work, what's not, what's idealistic. But I really want to start with, at least from my perspective, nothing works without vision combined with a little bit of political will. And as I shared with you, a lot of mayors are making this the cornerstone of their platform. Here in Columbus, Ohio, Mayor Ginther launched a competition for creative affordable housing coming from some community funding. And then there are other places. The state of Illinois, they just announced today that there is legislation that is in place, and they're going to come up with some creative affordable housing options that actually everyone believes will work. But my first question is, it's easy when you have the vision. It's easy when you have the political will. But what do we do when we don't? Ray, I'm gonna go to you first. I'll take Pam off the hot seat since she works for local government.
I think that, I mean, that's a tough one, to be completely honest and frank with you. I think that if you don't have the vision and you don't have the political will, I think you have to have, you know, the access to the financing and the resources and the land. You know, in my mind, it's infeasible to see a solution-oriented city or municipality move forward with affordable housing if there is no vision. And if the vision has to come from the private sector, then that needs to be matched by local resources and funding. I mean, there's some federal financing tools that are in place, thank goodness, that are consistent regardless of which jurisdiction you're in. But what I find is that the cities that understand the profile of their constituents and the fact that affordable housing doesn't always mean one specific you know, thread of, you know, the income status. It doesn't all have to be 30%, doesn't all have to be 50%. I mean, affordable housing are usually people that service and are the engine of the city. And in my mind, you know, doing a little bit about public housing authorities in 1937, you know, the safe, decent, affordable, and accessible housing, you know, is pretty important and shouldn't be difficult to obtain. But it can't happen if, you know, there is no political vision with some respect or political will. But there certainly has to be finances. So there's got to be some type of mechanism in place that rewards developers, whether they be for-profit or nonprofit, for you know, utilizing their own property to convert, like churches, for example, that may want to do something that is in the form of public purpose, or developers who are doing a market rate project, but recognize that for one reason or another, that, you know, with the increase of density for that project, they'll have to provide a certain level of affordable housing, but, you know, but see that there's social significance by integrating housing communities so that the people that, you know, that make up the city may actually look like the development.
Pam, I'm going to flip the question for you. Is political will and vision enough? And I think Ray has already spoken to it, but after years in local government, what are your thoughts?
Political will and vision is certainly a great start, right? But it's not enough, right? And so it has to be met with practicality, right? And so when I talk about practicality, it has to be met with funding, it has to be met with developers, and it has to be met with the right regulatory environment, right? And so I think that's where the role of the local government, and that's the role of practitioners such as myself, come in to kind of align all of those pieces on the chessboard to make those happen. And Rita, if I were to flip that question, the question that you first asked, my answer was going to be you have to create it, right? And so if if there is no political will and there is no vision, you have to create it. And no matter how you look at it, there are lots of moving parts. And I think one of the best ways to create that and to be successful is to have your partners aligned, have your partnership aligned, and really to talk about or to begin to understand an adequate supply of affordable housing, whether it's new construction or preservation, and really talk about that from how it benefits the city, right? Or whatever the locality is that you're in. And I think that all of those are the right ingredients and really makes the case for why affordable housing.
Okay. Jeff, I'm going to kind of go to the whole finance thing. We talk about money. I would start singing the OJ since you're from Cleveland, but we don't want to do that today. But it is, for the love of money, money drives everything.
I want to hear one verse. I want to hear one verse.
No. But I do, you talked about rent vouchers, and obviously there's a great deal of money that is paid to landlords every year to subsidize their tenants' rent. And that number is getting larger and larger, and at one point larger than HUD's budget. And so then you talked about home ownership. And so tell us, how do you find that happy medium? And obviously we're in a different administration than we used to be, but I have to believe it was challenging. And then, so how do you see your role as it relates to the vouchers and affordable housing?
Well, thank you. I think our role is to work very hard to try to take advantage of whatever opportunities we have that are provided at the time that they're available. So if there's opportunities to do vouchers and things like that, we have to put our focus on it. Pam made a very good point in terms of cultivating relationships. These things just don't happen. But there is a path for everything. It just depends on, how much capital you want to expend to get there and how much interest it is to make that occur. So for me, our role is to try to go down as many of those paths as possible for the people that we get paid to serve, which are our residents and the folks in the community. The voucher program represents a lot of things for a lot of people, but it does provide an opportunity for you to go into a different area where you may be able to have access to things that you may not be able to have access to where you are. But while that's important, it's also important to stabilize and to invest in the areas where people are. So you're not just focused on transporting people out of communities, you're also focused on reestablishing and reinvesting in those communities. Creating those home ownership opportunities and affordable housing opportunities in communities where people are. And there are a lot of people that would like that. I mean, there are a lot of people who say, why do I need to go somewhere else when all you need to do is to invest in where I am? And I agree with that. And a lot of the housing developments that we've done over the last, 5, 10, 15 years have been revitalizing and utilizing the financial tools that are available, whether it be HUD grants or whether it be 9% tax credits or 4% tax credits or what have you, to reinvest in those communities. Because again, you want people to be able to live in safe, decent, affordable housing. Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority was the first chartered housing authority back in 1933. And so for us, our mission and our goal is to try to make sure we provide those opportunities while also still trying to provide opportunities to help people move towards self-sufficiency, which is, again, one of the key components of the home ownership program.
Thank you. Thank you. So still talking about financing, there are a number of tools that people have utilized, everything from increased property taxes to development impact, community land trust, funds. Ray, what do you think?
Yes. I mean, you're exactly right. What I think is when I go into a new market, there are your standard tools in the tool belt, but it is exciting when you go into areas of the city. City of Columbus, for example, maybe a couple of years ago, just created the $20 million bond fund, I believe. City of Charleston, South Carolina, just initiated the $20 to $25 million bond fund. Washington, D.C., the mayor here has taken it from 100 million up to 300 million. And I think that, it's hard for no one person or no one city is going to solve the deficit in the dearth of affordable housing need. But I think creative solutions, and shared best practices on what works and what doesn't work, is a good thing. And it seems to me like, whether it's 10 million, 20 million, or 300 million, depending on the locality, that cities are starting to recognize that that just the nonprofits aren't responsible for delivering affordable housing. I mean, now, because of the exposure of affordable housing or workforce housing, you're starting to see a lot of larger development players team with PHAs, team with local nonprofits and local developers to do affordable housing. It's becoming a pretty interesting space. But I agree with everything that you just said. And I always like to, and also the non-tangible financing tools like, the pilots, for example, or, situations where there may be complete tax exemption if there's a nonprofit that's involved, or some cities that go a little further that can afford to, that if it's a 100% affordable project, or at least for 100% of the affordable units, they will provide a tax exemption for a period of 10 to 15 years. Those type of creative things that may work for a vacant piece of parcel that may not be currently contributing to the tax roll, may be a good incentive to activate that space, bring all of the good things that come with having, people that are living there, but at the same time create longevity for affordability by not having to pay taxes on the project directly, which only help your capital stack, which goes back to lesser pressure on the financing availability that you'll need for the project.
And the long-term investment.
Right, exactly. I mean, because if you have to pay taxes, if you have to, pay all the impact fees, ultimately it just drives up the amount of need. I mean, right. Affordable housing will always try to solve to a gap, for example.
So my favorite topic as a former city attorney or recovering city attorney is always the regulatory portion. And in fact, Pam alluded to it. And I can tell you, having been on the other side, I've sat through a number of zoning hearings and planning discussions, and it can be challenging. I mean, it can just be incredibly challenging. There's always the people who say, not in my neighborhood, or there's always a need for substantial change in zoning modifications and everything that has to go with that. And there are some that say, in order to get this done, we have to relax the zoning and development regulations to make it happen. I'm coming your way, Pam. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I do think it's an all hands on deck approach. And when I say all hands, I don't mean just like, for example, my department, the housing and neighborhoods department, working with what we call our planning department, but also do mean the political will, and I also do mean the neighborhoods. Right. So one of the things that we did in Charlotte recently was the council, very contentious, passed what was called the 2040 comprehensive plan. And basically the comprehensive, what that plan will enable us to do, and again, it just passed, is to have fewer zoning hearings, we hope, right? By going in, doing place types, making it more possible for developers to develop denser properties, right? Which you often think about in terms of affordable housing being a denser product type. So that's one of the things that's going on here. But I mean, you're absolutely right, Rita. In terms of the whole regulatory environment, it's contentious. Developers, and Ray, perhaps you'll appreciate this, developers get pegged with bad developers or greedy developers, right? We know affordable developers, the whole capital stack doesn't allow for you to be a greedy developer. I'm not suggesting that Ray and others should not make money. That's their profession. But we know when you're building an affordable property with a long-term deed restriction on it, you're not going to make as much as that market rate developer because you're not going to be able to raise the rents, that kind of thing. So, but my point is, if developers, we have a mandatory requirement here for developers to go in if you're getting city funding and if you're going through a rezoning process, right? There's a community engagement portion to that, where developers have to engage the community. And so I just raised that to say, there's been lots of success if you can go in, if you can talk with the community and relieve some of their fears and anxieties. That often helps when it comes down to the rezoning. Depending on where you are, affordable housing has become such a need for many communities. What we're starting to see is communities are starting to advocate and lobby on behalf of developers once they understand what's being built, who's going to live there. And so that helps through the regulatory process as well. But, some of the other things that we're considering here is, how do we can't relieve regulatory fees, but then how do we reimburse regulatory fees? Because we know that that's a significant part of a development as well. And then basically too, time is money, right? So it's this whole speed to market thing. So here in Charlotte, North Carolina, we have the county who does the vertical development, approve all those plans, the city who does the horizontal. So how can we work together with those departments to really help developers through that whole regulatory process? So I could talk a whole lot more about the complexities of the regulatory environment, but those are kind of just a few examples of how, we recognize the complexity of the regulatory environment and how we're trying to help particularly affordable developers navigate through that complex regulatory environment.
So I have to believe both Ray and Jeff have been on the other side of that. Ray, what about your experiences? If you had an opportunity to give Pam the benefit of your wisdom and advice, what would you say?
I stay on the other side of that. I was just on the other side of that about 2 hours ago. But Pam is exactly right. So first, so two things. One from the community outreach and engagement perspective, and then secondly from the regulatory side. I wholeheartedly agree that it is so important, regardless of whether it's affordable housing or not, any type of development, to do respectful and proactive community engagement and outreach. I started in affordable housing over 25 years ago with Enterprise. And just kind of the base philosophy was that when I get in the car, I'm going to drive home, right? And I'm leaving the community, that this is whoever's community it is, this is an established neighborhood or something you're trying to do within an established neighborhood. And you need to approach the neighbors in that community and help them understand what it is that you're trying to do. And that's just not go in and say, I'm going to make housing that's affordable. You talk about what the AMIs are, because I think that part of the notion of, some aspect of the NIMBYism is that it gets lost on people exactly who you're serving. So I find that when you can explain and give concrete examples of who you're serving, maybe it's the teachers, maybe it's EMS, maybe it's the public health workers, maybe it's service workers of the hotel, that there's an understanding that of what the need is and how you're trying to address it. The other thing is from a design perspective, and I'm sure Pam and her team wouldn't let me get away with it. You want to make sure that they understand that the design quality is not going to be compromised because of the financing stack. As a matter of fact, some of I'm finding that more and more architects and developer partners are pushing the envelope on creativity as it relates to just design aesthetics. Whether it's CNI, or just a straightaway LIHTC project, it doesn't have to look like whatever affordable housing is supposed to look like. Right. And the third thing and the last thing is that being on this side of the fence, I'm a huge proponent of like an easy pass approach. Not, let me get away with whatever I want to, but if I'm doing an affordable housing deal, and that I've gotten 7 or 8 different layers of financing, which require me to answer to 7 or 8 different people, aside from the local municipality, and I'm serving a public benefit. I'd like to believe I'll still do the speed limit, but if I could just do it in a separate lane with maybe an ambassador that's put out by the planning or regulatory department who help guides me through some areas called DRC, Development Review Committee, somebody that I can call and say, hey, we've been waiting for transportation to review and stamp our permit, or at least get it off their desk and put it on, the folks' desk who deal with the bike lane. They can say, hold on one second, let me go over and talk to whoever it is, versus me trying to navigate it as the developer who's always pushing or always trying to do an end run. So I would love to see a universal ambassador or liaison program instituted in cities that are serious about helping affordable housing developers kind of navigate the regulatory process.
And Rita,
Awesome.
if I could jump in, I mean, exactly
Sure.
what Ray is talking about. I mean, we've seen that work here in Charlotte, right? I tell people all the time, no affordable development goes up without Charlotte Water, right? So that's our utilities department. So what we've been able to do, and I won't say it's 100% perfect, but we had to start with educating our city team internally, right? So our city council has this goal to expand the supply of affordable housing. So we had to get all of our internal players around the table and say, look, you guys, you all have a part in the council's goal. And so once we were able to help our internal partners understand that, we really are making strides, right? So it's not just helping them understand the regulatory environment and the role that they play in it, but it's also, Ray alluded to it, you know, one of his bosses, depending on where he is if he's doing low-income housing tax credits, and if he's doing a 9% tax credit, he's got to place that in service by a particular date, right? And so just helping, again, our internal players understand, you know, Ray is against this time clock that, you know, he can't miss, right? And so that's a proven strategy. It's going to take some diligence. It's going to take a leader, most of the time from the housing department or from a city manager or a mayor's office. But that approach, having that concierge, having them, I mean, here in Charlotte, it takes 2 to 3 months to get through the rezoning process. So all of that is bumping up against, you know, that timeline that Ray and other developers might have.
And I actually will agree and add, as Pam indicated at the end, sometimes it takes that driver. In my other life as city attorney in Dayton, Ohio, oftentimes the city attorney ended up becoming the driver because the city manager said, you got to make this happen. And so you're absolutely right. The only thing I would suggest is that person can be internal or that person can be a liaison, but it could be, you know, someone internal who is tasked either by the mayor or the city manager or someone else that says, go make this happen and put all the dots of the internal, sometimes bureaucracies all together. So I share that as a best practice that anybody can take advantage of. Jeff, I can see, you know, I'm coming your way. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, it's interesting because what both Pam and Ray said is right on point. You do need that assistance, but sometimes people just need to understand that it's more important to find a way to do than to rely and be comfortable in coming up with reasons not to do. And sometimes there are legitimate reasons. Sometimes people want to go and they just want to just go, and regardless of the rules. But sometimes, you know, there has to be an understanding. And I do think, going to Pam's point, it's an educational process. Sometimes, you know, you think that people get money to do something and they just can just go at whatever pace without understanding that, no, they have timelines and thresholds of when certain things have to be accomplished. And if those things aren't accomplished within those timelines, it puts the project at risk. If the project is at risk or doesn't happen, then it affects the people that you serve. And then you really are answering questions about why, because Ray's going to say, hey, look, I told you guys that I needed to put this in service by X, Y, and Z date. So it does come for, I think, some education of everybody in the process at the beginning of the project to know what's going on. Sometimes, you know, you start these things and you don't really understand all of the steps that are in the equation and make it happen. So you really do need to make sure that you spend some time saying at the beginning of the project, okay, here's where we go. Here are our timelines, here are our guidelines. And then going back to, I think, some of the issues about coming into certain communities and things like that, I think it's just important for people to realize that there are opportunities in communities. You just have to build those relationships. And let's say that that Ray was doing a project in a community, and let's say that Pam actually, you know, in her city, they said we like to see a 60-unit mixed income development. Well, Ray may be able to work with the housing authority to say, okay, well, we don't necessarily want the development to be fully subsidized, but maybe we could work something where you guys may do, you know, 15, 20 project-based vouchers in that development. And there may be an incentive to the developer to make some of those units, more affordable. There are just opportunities for partnerships and collaborations if people sit down at the table and realize that it's to everybody's benefit to find ways to get people housed, not to find reasons to not house.
Well said, very well said. And actually, as I shared with you, most propitious, that was one of my father's favorite words, that the article came out in the Tribune about what Illinois is doing and talking about that 20% of a development needs to be affordable and being aggressive in that way. Now, Illinois tends to be a little aggressive and in terms of what they're willing to do and challenge, but I do think that that's the perfect example of what you're talking about. So I wanted to, before we run out of time, as I shared with you, Secretary Fudge will be sharing comments as part of this program with the Rainbow Push Convention. And there are some believe that the problem is a national problem, and therefore the solution should be a national one. Jeff, I'm gonna let you off the hook since that's your boss, but I do. I do wonder, are we like Canada? I mean, Canada's been successful in taking it on as a national problem and coming up with a significant policy solution. Is it a national problem, Ray?
Well, I certainly think that the problem is national. I mean, I'm not going to spout statistics. There are plenty of folks who can do that. But just in my mind, selfishly, I feel like the solution and the target should be much more smaller. And what I mean by that is that I think the burden should be on the localities to help execute on strategies and solutions to begin to solve the national problem. So if the national problem is 100 and it's divided by all the states, then one state based on their number of proportionally their income and the number of affordable housing units that are needed. I mean, that's a pretty good indicator of what the target for that state should be. And then let's figure out whether it's through the State Housing Finance Agency, all the public housing authorities in there, the development community, how we can go about creatively attacking that. And putting projects and mechanisms in place in order to be able to start to solve that. Just selfishly, and she's not my boss, but if I take $1, at some point she does become my boss, right? Because it's going to go into covenants. I would say that I wouldn't want to put all of that pressure on L'Enfant Plaza, where HUD's located, or the area HUD agencies to be the driver of that. I want them on the bus, obviously. I love to have their financing on the bus. Love to have some of their property that's underutilized or vacant on the bus. But I want to keep it with Pam and the folks who are, no disrespect, but I'll just say boots on the ground with me to try to solve, a very, a smaller target. I can't even imagine. I did Hope Sixes for a while, and it's a very, as Jeffrey can acknowledge, it's not all. It's a very challenging and sometimes difficult process to navigate everything that goes along with having a successful mixed finance project. And it's easy to do once you get in the throes of doing it, but to put that problem and that pressure. I don't know that that's where we want to concentrate the issue. I think the issue should be more decentralized with maybe some overarching financing tools like RAD, for example, is something that rolled out recently.
And I think too, to Ray's point, I think a lot of times people, we don't look at the affordable housing challenge in a global perspective. We want to just kind of confine it to certain areas or certain folks. There are a lot of people that are affected by this. And I think that the broader the dialogue is about the issue, the more engaged that folks are with it, then I think that gives the secretary as well as others, as Ray calls them, boots on the ground, the ability to realize that, okay, this is an issue that we have been empowered by the people to address. And here's our, but if folks aren't, pushing for it and we don't get the attention that this is a national issue and this is a challenge, then all of a sudden it just goes on a back burner with a whole bunch of other things. And that's unfortunate. So utilizing those tools like RAD and other programs that are out there are things that I think will be helpful, but we got to keep it on the front burner. We got to make sure people realize that this is bigger than just one agency. This needs to be a part of a larger conversation to address some of the other things that are tied with affordable housing challenges.
Thank you. Pam.
Yeah, so this is great. So I'll try to marry kind of our earlier conversation and then marry the comments that Jeff and Ray just shared with us. So I believe that it is a national issue. But I would echo what Ray said in terms of being solved at a local level. I think there are some national tools that Secretary Fudge has alluded to, and I think they're great tools. I think, if we could, there's lots of talk about universal vouchers and increasing those. But one of the things we all know is that unless private sector property owners are incentivized some way to accept more, in Jeff's case, housing choice vouchers, we can have all the vouchers we want, but if there's no place for the people to go, then that's a problem. So I think there could be a national solution to get more of those on the ground wherever you are locally. Ray talked earlier about the low-income housing tax credit program, great tool. How do we expand on that tool for today's situation so that it can be more effectively used at the local level? And so I think we'd be foolish to think the whole thing would be solved at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue or anywhere around there. But if we can work with the national tools that we have and really work together more locally, marrying the funding, marrying the regulatory environment, marrying the political will, that we can continue to make great strides. Because it is a national issue, right? Everybody deserves a safe, decent, affordable house to live, affordable place to live. And one more thing I would say in terms of national, and Jeff, you alluded to it, back in the day, we did a Hope 6 grant, right? But there was no requirement to reach over to the Department of Transportation, right? And so I would just say nationally, as notices of funding availabilities are coming down, let's marry some of the transportation, some of the education, some of the Department of Justice requirements, wrap all of those together. And that's how I believe you really create high quality, affordable housing, get the right people in it, and really revitalize neighborhoods throughout your city, wherever you are.
And to piggyback, I think what you're all saying, though, and in an interesting way, because you remember I started out with that will, the political will and the vision. The reality is if we end up with the vision, if you will, and the power from DC and from the secretary and from the administration and a toolbox, then we can push it down and then the locals have exactly what they need to accomplish the end. I think that becomes an interesting solution to how do we accomplish it, at least in the short term, as long as things don't change. So in wrapping up, I want everybody to have an opportunity to kind of close out with their final comments and their thoughts from their perspective and share their best practice, their best thought, what they want to leave the viewers with. And I will start with you, Mr. Patterson.
Okay. First, I think that it's just important that, you have these types of conversations, that this is a way to keep affordable housing in the front of what's going on and making sure that it remains focused on the people that benefit from it and that are in need of it. Yes, there are other ways for other people to receive wins, so to speak, out of it. But at the end of the day, it's about people having a good place to live. I think we have to continue to utilize programs and things like that. I think we need to position ourselves to be able to work with the administration to help find different ways, inform each other of what works and what doesn't work, but have a constructive dialogue, again, with the end being to provide good housing opportunities for people. And I think, again, I'm going to go back to that educational process, letting people know, what does housing look like today? Some people think that it looks just like some of the stuff that you may have seen so many years ago. But if you go into a lot of communities, you can't tell the newly developed affordable housing from the new housing that's in the community. You know, I think, you know, letting people see that, letting people understand that, letting people know that the people that are moving into those developments are people who are just like everyone else. And all they want is the same things that everyone else wants. A nice house, a good community, a good school system, a place to shop, all those types of things. So it's not just, you want to have great housing, but you also want to build community. And I think that goes to Pam's point of making sure that as you start to focus in on affordable housing, that you also look at bringing those other resources and those other partners to the table to collaborate, to be able to walk away with something that everyone can be proud of. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Pam, your closing comments?
Sure. I would just agree with Jeff that we have to continue to have the constructive dialogue at all levels of government. And not only have the dialogue, though, I think we have to be willing to do the work and not put this conversation in the too hard pile, right? And so we've got to innovate, create new tools, push the envelope on the ones that we have. But what I also don't want to leave out is affordable housing, high quality affordable housing is intrinsically linked to good paying jobs. And it is also linked to both physical and mental health. And so we have to understand that and continue to make the case for working across the aisle, across the organizations to really ensure that we have an adequate supply of affordable housing in our nation.
Thank you. And take us home, Ray Nix.
Well, I'm not sure how I got flipped on the order here because it's awfully hard to back up what Pam and Jeffrey said. But the two things that I wrote down and what my co-panelists mentioned earlier, and Jeffrey must have said this 75 times, is people. And Pam, her underlying comments always seem to be weighted and anchored by partnership. And I would say that this type of dialogue in our industry, in our respective parts of this industry, is critical to the success of being able to, what I like to say is get to yes in this affordable housing crisis. I would encourage people, as my parting shot, to we're not going to find an easy solution, right? Because affordable housing, it's not easy. It's not supposed to be easy, but we can figure out a way to effectively execute. And I would encourage all of us to focus on moving from being transactional to understanding that the opportunity and the objective, as Jeffrey said earlier, is to build communities. So I look forward to engaging in the future. I am very grateful for having met you, co-panelists, and Rita, as you as the host. This has been a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to getting back to work today.
Well, having said that, I want to thank you all so very much for your time, for your wisdom. You all have been exceptional panelists, and I know when everyone hears this panel, they will flock to each of you for more information, for more dialogue, and for more opportunities to move the needle as it relates to affordable housing. So with that, I will close out and say simply, thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Nice meeting everyone.
Thank you. Nice meeting all of you.